The moment I walked through the front door of my childhood home, I could tell something was off. The familiar scent of Mom's rose-scented candles lingered in the air, but the warmth I had associated with this house all my life was missing. It felt hollow, almost foreign, and an uneasy knot formed in my stomach. My name's Emma, and after spending a year abroad working on a major career opportunity, I thought coming home would feel like stepping into a cozy, well-worn sweater. I couldn't have been more wrong. "Mom!" I called, wheeling my suitcase across the creaky hardwood floor. The sound echoed in the silence until it was interrupted by the clatter of pots in the kitchen. "Emma, Mia!" Mom's voice was warm, but had an edge to it I didn't recognize. She appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a floral apron, her embrace a little too quick, her pullback even faster. "We weren't expecting you until tomorrow." "I caught an earlier flight," I said, looking past her into the living room. Everything seemed the same, yet something was undeniably different. Then my eyes landed on the empty space above the mantel. "Where's Abuela's portrait?" I asked, my voice already tinged with suspicion. Mom hesitated, her smile faltering. "Oh, we had to move some things around for Carmen's wedding planning." I walked over to the spot where the portrait had hung for as long as I could remember. The faint outline of its frame was still visible on the wall, like a ghost of its former presence. My fingers traced the faded rectangle as an unease settled over me. "And Abuela's ring?" I asked, my voice quieter now. "I think I'd like to wear it now that I'm home." The silence that followed was deafening. Mom wouldn't meet my eyes. She fussed with her apron, her hands trembling just enough for me to notice. "Mom?" I pressed, stepping closer, my voice low but firm. "Where's the ring?" Her shoulders stiffened. "We needed it for Carmen's wedding," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hit me like a slap. "You sold it?" I asked, my voice cracking. The idea seemed impossible, absurd. That ring wasn't just jewelry. It was a piece of our family, a part of Abuela. It had survived decades, maybe even centuries, passed down through the generations with a promise it would go to me when I turned 30. Mom's jaw tightened. "Carmen needed it more," she said, as if that explained everything. "That ring was mine. Abuela made you promise." "You've been gone too long, Emma." She cut me off, her voice suddenly sharp. "Carmen's here, building her life, while you've been off chasing your dreams in Europe." My chest burned with a mix of disbelief and anger. "Chasing my dreams?" I shot back. "I've been building a career? You knew I couldn't come back for my birthday. I was closing the biggest deal of my life." But Mom didn't care. I could see it in the way she turned her back on me, heading toward the kitchen like the conversation was over. Before I could follow, the front door swung open, and Carmen waltzed in, her arms full of wedding magazines. "Emma!" she squealed, dropping everything to rush over and hug me. "You're early!" I stiffened in her embrace, then pulled back. "You sold Abuela's ring?" Carmen froze, her perfectly made-up face twitching as her smile faltered. "Oh, that," she said, glancing at Mom. "It was just sitting in a box, Emma. We needed the money for the venue. You understand, right?" "No," I said flatly. "I don't understand. That ring was the last thing Abuela gave me before she died. She made you both promise it would be mine." "You weren't here," Mom interjected from the kitchen, her voice harder than before. "We had to make decisions. Carmen's wedding is in 2 months, and the venue was expensive." I turned back to Carmen, my jaw clenched. "So you sold a piece of our family's history for a fancy party?" "Don't be so dramatic," Carmen said with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "It's just a ring, Emma. And the wedding is going to be perfect. Wait until you see it." "Congratulations," I said, my voice as steady as I could manage while rage built inside me. "I hope it was worth it." Carmen opened her mouth to respond, but I grabbed my suitcase and headed upstairs before she could. In my old room, I sank onto the bed, the anger and betrayal finally catching up with me. The room hadn't changed. Same posters on the walls, same stack of dusty books on the shelves, but it felt like a stranger's space now. I pulled out my phone and texted my best friend, Remy. They sold it. Abuela's ring. They actually sold it. Remy's reply came almost instantly. What are you going to do? I stared at the photo on my nightstand. Me and Abuela on my college graduation day. She was holding my hand, her ring glinting in the sunlight. I could still hear her voice, warm and full of pride. Mija, this ring survived wars. It crossed oceans. It's meant for someone strong, someone who fights for what matters. A bitter smile tugged at my lips as I typed back to Remy. I'm going to make them regret it. Every last penny they got from that ring. From downstairs, I could hear Carmen chatting excitedly about flowers and table settings, and Mom's laughter floated up through the floorboards. My jaw clenched. They thought they could dismiss me, dismiss Abuela's wishes, just because I'd been gone. They were wrong. The next morning, I set up shop at the local coffee house, laptop open and ready. Being a financial analyst had its perks, namely, knowing exactly where to look when things didn't add up. More coffee? The barista asked, hovering near my table. Please, I muttered, not looking up. Something wasn't right. Carmen's wedding venue was ridiculously expensive, and the money from Abuela's ring wouldn't have covered even half of it. There had to be more to the story. My phone buzzed with a text from Carmen. Dress fitting at 2. You're coming, right? Of course, I replied, while opening another browser tab to dig deeper. That's when I found it. A mortgage approval, dated just 3 weeks ago. My fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up the associated property records. Holy crap. Carmen and Lucas hadn't just sold Abuela's ring to pay for the wedding. They'd used it as part of the down payment on a house. By the time I met Remy for lunch, my mind was racing with everything I'd uncovered. She slid into the booth across from me, already ordering her usual coffee. All right, she said, leaning forward. Spill. I pushed my laptop toward her, the documents open and ready. They didn't just sell Abuela's ring for the wedding. They used the money as part of a down payment on a house. Look at this. Remy scrolled through the records, her eyes widening. This house is gorgeous, but... She frowned, tapping the screen. These mortgage terms? Yikes, one missed payment and they're screwed. Exactly, I said, crossing my arms. They barely qualified even with the ring money. It's a house of cards. Remy looked up, narrowing her eyes at me. What are you thinking, Emma? I shrugged, trying to sound casual. You remember Jake from high school? He's a real estate agent now. He handled the sale. And he owes me a favor. Remy groaned, already seeing where this was headed. You're not seriously thinking about going after their house, are you? Who said anything about going after it? I asked, picking at my fries. I'm just keeping my options open. Emma? Remy warned, but I cut her off. They stole from me, Remy, I said, my voice low and steady. That ring wasn't just some shiny piece of jewelry. It was hers, and they tossed it away like it meant nothing. The waitress arrived with our food, cutting off whatever argument Remy was about to make. I waited until she left before leaning forward again. I'm not doing anything illegal, I said. I'm just asking a few questions. Remy sighed, shaking her head. This isn't just about the ring anymore, is it? You're right, I said, smiling grimly. It's about respect. It's about family. It's about keeping promises. Later that afternoon, I sat through Carmen's dress fitting, playing the part of the supportive sister. She stood on a raised platform, surrounded by mirrors, while Mom dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. You look beautiful, Mija, Mom said, her voice full of emotion. Carmen twirled, the gown sparkling under the boutique's lights. Isn't it perfect, Emma? She asked, beaming. I forced a smile. It's stunning, I said, and it was. Simple, elegant, and everything Carmen wasn't. Wait until you see the house, Carmen added, practically glowing. It's perfect, too. Lucas and I close next week. That's great, I said, my phone buzzing in my pocket. I glanced at the screen, a text from Jake. Coffee tomorrow? Usual spot. Emma, you'll come to dinner tonight, won't you? Carmen asked, clasping her hands. Lucas's parents are coming over, and Dad's making paella. Wouldn't miss it, I said, typing back to Jake. Tomorrow at 10. See you then. That evening, I sat at the dinner table, watching my family laugh and chat like nothing was wrong. Carmen was her usual charming self, showing off her ring and gushing about the wedding. Lucas's parents, polite and kind, had no idea of the chaos bubbling beneath the surface. To Carmen and Lucas, Dad said, raising his glass, and their new beginning. Everyone clinked glasses, and I forced myself to sip my wine, even as my stomach churned. Carmen's new beginning was built on lies and broken promises. Tatum's been so quiet, Carmen said suddenly, her voice cutting through the chatter. Tell us about Europe. Did you meet anyone special? I smiled tightly, setting my glass down. Actually, I did meet someone interesting recently. Oh? Carmen leaned forward, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. I paused, letting the moment stretch. A real estate agent, I said finally. The table fell silent. Mom's fork clattered against her plate. You're looking to buy? She asked, her voice laced with suspicion. Just keeping my options open, I replied, echoing my words to Remy. You never know when the perfect opportunity might come along. The conversation moved on, but I caught Mom watching me out of the corner of her eye. She looked nervous, and that gave me just a little bit of satisfaction. The next morning, I met Jake at our old high school hangout, a quiet coffee shop with mismatched chairs and an outdated jukebox. He still had that easy smile and nervous finger-tapping habit, but his suit and tie were new. Thanks for meeting me, I said, sliding into the booth. Of course, Jake said, handing me a folder. Here's everything I could pull on the property. I opened it, scanning the documents. Tell me what I'm looking at. Jake leaned forward, lowering his voice. Your sister and Lucas barely qualified for this mortgage. They're stretched thin. The down payment from the ring sale just barely made the minimum requirement. How much was the ring worth? I asked, the question burning in my mind. Jake hesitated. Market value? About $15,000, but they sold it to a private collector who paid $25,000. I swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat. $25,000. That's all they thought Abuela's legacy was worth. There's something else, Jake continued, pointing to a clause in the mortgage agreement. The seller included a right of first refusal clause. If they default within the first year, the property goes back on the market, with conditions. What kind of conditions? The kind that make it tough for most buyers to qualify, Jake said, giving me a pointed look. Unless they have liquid assets and excellent credit. I leaned back, my mind racing. So if they miss a payment? They lose the house, Jake finished. My phone buzzed with a text from Remy. How's the meeting going? Don't do anything stupid. Jake tapped his fingers on the table. Whatever you're planning, Emma, be careful. Real estate can get messy. Don't worry, I said, sliding the documents into my bag. I learned from the best. Remember our high school debate team? Jake laughed, shaking his head. Just don't say I didn't warn you. Back home, I spread the documents across my desk, my plan falling into place. Carmen thought she'd won, but she had no idea what was coming. Abuela used to say, patience is the companion of wisdom. I had plenty of both. The next week flew by in a blur of wedding errands and carefully calculated moves. Carmen had roped me into every detail, cake tastings, seating charts, flower arrangements, and I played along, all while keeping my plans firmly in motion. At one point, she handed me a slice of champagne cake with raspberry filling, her face glowing. Isn't this amazing? It's perfect, I said, smiling. Inside, I was thinking about the house, the debt, and the cracks beginning to show in their perfect little facade. Oh, and Lucas's parents are giving us furniture as a wedding gift, she added, practically bouncing in her seat. We're so lucky everything is falling into place. I just nodded. Falling into place, I thought bitterly. More like crumbling apart. A few days later, I met Jake at the empty house Carmen and Lucas had so proudly announced was theirs. The painters were finishing up in the kitchen, leaving the rest of the place eerily quiet. "The seller's interested in your offer," Jake said, handing me another folder. "If anything happens with the current buyers—" He trailed off, but we both knew where this was going. "When's their next payment due?" I asked. Jake checked his phone. 3 days before the wedding. If they miss it, everything's ready to go on your end." I glanced around the living room, imagining Carmen and Lucas's plans, the cozy Christmases she'd described, the wall she wanted to fill with wedding photos. My eyes landed on a corner where she'd excitedly mentioned putting a rocking chair for future kids. "Having second thoughts?" Jake asked, breaking the silence. "No," I said firmly, pulling out my phone. I scrolled to a photo of Abuela's ring, its simple gold band and tiny diamonds glinting in the light. They made their choice. Now they'll live with it. The day before the wedding, everything started to unravel. It began with a panicked call from Carmen. "The florist backed out," she wailed. "Something about policy changes and needing full payment up front. What am I supposed to do?" I fought the urge to roll my eyes. "Breathe," I said calmly. "We'll figure it out." "You mean you'll figure it out?" she snapped. Then softening, she added, "Please, Emma, I need you." I hung up, texting Remy as I gathered my things. "Everything's in motion. Be ready." That night at dinner, the cracks in their perfect life were impossible to ignore. Carmen was unusually quiet, picking at her food, while Lucas stared off into the distance. "Everything okay?" I asked, feigning concern. "The caterer called," Lucas said, not meeting my eyes. "They're demanding full payment by tomorrow or they'll cancel. We can't keep pulling from the wedding fund." Carmen's fork clattered against her plate. "We don't have a choice, Lucas. The wedding is tomorrow. We can't just—" "You could postpone," I offered casually, sipping my wine. Carmen whipped her head toward me, her eyes blazing. "We are not postponing. Everyone's coming. Everything is booked. It has to be perfect." Her voice cracked on the last word, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The next morning, the house of cards finally came crashing down. Jake texted me, "Payment missed. It's done." At the same time, Remy called. "The venue got paid, but barely. I've been going over the numbers, Emma. They're in deeper than we thought." "Doesn't matter," I said, watching the sun rise through my bedroom window. "The house is mine now." "Emma." Remy's voice was hesitant. "Are you sure about this? It's not too late to call it off." I glanced at the photo of Abuela on my desk, her smile soft, her eyes full of quiet strength. "They sold her ring, Remy. They broke their promise. There's no going back." By the time the wedding ceremony began, everything looked picture-perfect. Carmen floated down the aisle in her designer gown, radiant as ever, while Lucas waited at the altar, his smile strained but present. I sat in my assigned spot, clutching my bouquet, my phone buzzing in my pocket. Jake's message flashed on the screen. "Paperwork finalized. You're officially the owner." The words felt surreal, but not as surreal as the moment Carmen and Lucas exchanged rings. Hers a new, flashy diamond that screamed excess. My stomach twisted. The reception was more of the same. Smiles, laughter, and champagne flowing freely. I sat at my table, watching the happy couple dance, wondering how much of this would survive when reality set in. "You okay?" Remy asked, slipping into the seat beside me. "Perfect," I said, pulling an envelope from my clutch. "Tatum," she started, her tone cautious. But before she could say more, the DJ's voice boomed over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the maid of honor's speech." The room quieted as I stood, envelope in hand, and made my way to the microphone. "My sister Carmen," I began, my voice steady, "has always known exactly what she wants. The perfect wedding, the perfect house, the perfect life." I paused, locking eyes with her, and she's always known how to get it. Carmen's smile faltered. Lucas shifted uncomfortably beside her. "When we were kids," I continued, "Carmen wanted my favorite doll. She cried until our parents made me give it to her, When we were teenagers, she wanted my prom date. She got him too. The crowd murmured uneasily, but I pressed on. And this year, she wanted something that wasn't hers to take. I held up my phone, showing the photo of Abuela's ring. This ring survived wars. It crossed oceans, and it was promised to me. My voice hardened. But Carmen wanted a perfect wedding more than she wanted to keep that promise. "Emma," Mom warned from her table, but I ignored her. So today, on this perfect day, I wanted to give my sister a gift. I held up the envelope, something to match her perfect taste. The color drained from Carmen's face as I placed the envelope on their table. "It's the deed to your dream house," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Or rather, my dream house now. The payment you missed?" It triggered the default clause. I was ready to buy. The room erupted in gasps. Carmen's carefully crafted world shattered before my eyes. "You can't do this," she whispered, tears streaking her flawless makeup. "It's already done," I said, walking away. Here's part 5 of the story, maintaining the natural flow, logical progression, and emotional depth. Part 5, Shattered Illusions. The whispers and gasps from the reception hall followed me out into the garden. I needed air, a moment to process the chaos I'd just unleashed. The evening breeze carried the scent of roses, Carmen's favorite, of course, but even their sweetness couldn't cut through the tension swirling inside me. "Emma," Mom's voice snapped me back. I turned to see her storming toward me, Dad trailing behind her. Carmen and Lucas weren't far behind, her dress dragging in the dirt as she hurried across the perfectly manicured lawn. "What the hell was that?" Carmen shrieked, mascara streaking her face. I crossed my arms. The truth. "You ruined my wedding," she cried, her voice breaking. "No, Carmen," I said evenly. "You ruined it yourself the moment you sold Abuela's ring. Don't blame me for cleaning up your mess." "It wasn't a mess," she shot back. "We needed that money. You wouldn't understand. You've always had everything handed to you." I laughed bitterly. "I've had everything handed to me? That's rich coming from the girl who's never worked a day in her life. You sold something that wasn't yours to sell, Carmen." "That ring was mine. Abuela made sure of it." "Enough," Dad's voice boomed, silencing both of us. "This isn't how we solve things. Let's sit down and talk this out like a family." I turned to him, anger simmering beneath my calm exterior. Like a family? Where was all this family talk when Carmen and Mom decided to pawn off my inheritance for her fairy tale wedding? "Emma, please," Mom said, her voice tight with frustration. "We were trying to help Carmen. She and Lucas were in a tough spot." "And I wasn't," I interrupted. "Do you even realize what I've sacrificed to get where I am? The late nights, the endless hours of work, the relationships I couldn't keep because I was too busy trying to make something of myself? And yet, somehow, none of that matters to you because I wasn't here." Tears welled in Mom's eyes, but I didn't care. I'd held this in for too long. "This isn't what Abuela would have wanted," Dad said, his voice softer now. I turned to him, my jaw clenched. "Abuela would have wanted her family to honor their promises. She would have wanted us to respect the things she left behind, the memories, the history, the legacy, but instead, you let Carmen and Mom destroy all of it for a damn wedding venue." Carmen sank onto a garden bench, her dress pooling around her like a wilted flower. "We needed the money," she whispered. "We didn't have a choice." "Of course you had a choice," I snapped. "You just didn't care enough to make the right one." Later that night, I sat in my new kitchen, the keys to the house jingling on the counter beside me. I stared at them, the metallic clink echoing in the otherwise empty space. The house felt cold, even with the lights on and my boxes stacked neatly in the corner. My phone buzzed again, another message from Remy. Was it worth it? I sighed, leaning back in my chair. Was it? The truth was, I didn't know. I'd won, but the victory felt hollow. The doorbell rang, pulling me out of my thoughts. I opened it to find Lucas standing there, still in his wedding suit, his tie loose and his face pale. "Can I come in?" he asked hoarsely. I stepped aside, watching as he took in the bare walls and unopened boxes. "Efficient," he said dryly, gesturing at how quickly I'd moved in. "I learned from the best," I replied, folding my arms. "What do you want, Lucas?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Carmen's at your parents' house. She's not doing well." "That's not my problem," I said bluntly. "It is," he countered, meeting my eyes. "Because I know where the ring is." My heart skipped. "What are you talking about?" Lucas pulled an envelope from his jacket and handed it to me. Inside was a pawn ticket, dated 3 months ago. "She didn't sell it," he said quietly. "She pawned it. The story about the private collector? That was just a cover so you wouldn't look for it." My head spun. "You're saying she lied about selling it?" "She planned to get it back after the wedding," Lucas said, "when things settled down." Anger and disbelief warred within me. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I love her," he said simply. "But what she did was wrong, and now we're both paying for it." Before I could respond, the doorbell rang again. This time it was Carmen, her wedding dress wrinkled and stained, her makeup a mess. She pushed past Lucas into the house. "You weren't supposed to tell her!" she screamed, tears streaming down her face. "You lied to me," I said, my voice low and cold. "I was desperate," she shot back, clutching her purse like a lifeline. "We needed the money, Emma. The house, the wedding, everything was falling apart. I thought if I could just get through this, I could make it right." I stepped closer, my voice steady. "You had no right to pawn that ring. It wasn't yours. It was mine. And now you're trying to take everything from me?" she yelled. "The house, the wedding, my life, why are you doing this?" "Because you did it first," I yelled back. "Enough!" Mom's voice cut through the chaos as she and Dad appeared in the doorway. "This has to stop," Dad said, stepping between us. "Emma, Carmen, this isn't what your grandmother would have wanted." "No," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "She would have wanted us to fight for what matters, and that's exactly what I'm doing." Carmen clutched her purse tighter, her knuckles white. "If you want the ring," she said through gritted teeth, "sign the house back over to us." I stared at her, stunned by the audacity. "You think you can use Abuela's ring as leverage, after everything you've done?" "You're the one tearing this family apart," she spat. "No, Carmen," I said quietly. "You did that the moment you broke Abuela's promise." The room was heavy with silence after my words. Carmen looked like she wanted to scream, cry, and collapse all at once. Lucas reached for her shoulder, but she shook him off, her eyes locked on me. "You want the ring back so badly? Fine." She dug into her purse, pulling out the pawn ticket. "Here it is, go get it, but don't think this makes you the better person." I took the ticket, my hand trembling. I never claimed to be better. I just wanted what was mine. "And what about the house?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "Do you even want it? Or is this just about hurting me?" "This isn't about hurting you, Carmen," I said, though part of me wasn't so sure anymore. "It's about making you face the choices you made. Choices have consequences. You don't get to just brush them aside." Carmen's face crumpled, and for the first time, I saw something beyond anger and entitlement. She looked scared. "Emma," Mom said softly, stepping forward, "maybe we can fix this, together." I turned to her, my anger still simmering. "Fix it? Like how you fixed things by selling Abuela's ring without telling me? Or how you helped Carmen cover up her mistakes instead of holding her accountable?" Dad sighed heavily, rubbing the back of his neck. "We didn't handle this right, I'll admit that. But this fighting, this isn't what Abuela would have wanted. She'd want us to come together, not tear each other apart." I stared at him, my emotions warring inside me. He wasn't wrong. Abuela had always believed in family above all else, even when it wasn't easy. The next morning, I found myself standing outside a dingy pawn shop on the other side of town. The bell jingled as I stepped inside, the faint smell of metal and dust filling the air. "Help you?" the man behind the counter asked, glancing up from his newspaper. I slid the pawn ticket across the counter. "I'm here to reclaim something." He examined the ticket, then nodded and disappeared into the back. My heart raced as I waited, the weight of everything I'd done pressing down on me. When he returned, he was holding a small, worn velvet box. He placed it on the counter, and for a moment, I just stared at it, too afraid to open it. Finally, I flipped the lid. There it was, Abuela's ring, exactly as I remembered it. "That'll be $3,000, plus interest," the man said. I handed over my card, my hands shaking slightly as I slid the ring onto my finger. It felt right, like it had finally found its way home. Later that day, I showed up at my parents' house, the ring glinting in the sunlight as I knocked on the door. Mom opened it, her face a mix of relief and caution. "You came," she said. "I want to talk," I replied, stepping inside. Carmen was in the living room, surrounded by half-packed boxes and wedding gifts. She looked up when I entered, her expression wary. Lucas was beside her, his hand resting protectively on her knee. Dad sat in his armchair, looking older than I remembered. I placed an envelope on the coffee table. Carmen eyed it suspiciously. "What's that?" "A lease agreement," I said. 1 year, market rate rent. If you make all your payments on time, you'll have the option to buy the house back." Her eyes widened, and Lucas leaned forward to grab the envelope. "You're serious?" he asked, flipping through the papers. "Completely," I said, "but there are conditions." Carmen frowned. "What kind of conditions?" "No more secrets," I said firmly. "No more lies. And Carmen, you need help, real help, with your spending. No more living beyond your means." Carmen's eyes filled with tears. "I know," she whispered. "I've already talked to a financial advisor." Story 3. At 28, I wasn't really looking for love. I was too preoccupied with becoming a rising star. My cubicle felt more like home than any bar the dating app could ever provide, and spreadsheets from my finance company were my love language. Sarah's rooftop party followed. My best friend and co-worker Sarah had a knack for pushing me to step outside of my comfort zone. Artists, musicians, and some office-related acquaintances made up the crowd this time. It was then that I saw him. He was having a light-hearted argument with another man about how to repair a brick structure. Tall and slender, with tousled, dark brown hair and gentle eyes, he wore a faded band over a weathered leather jacket, t-shirt. The complete antithesis of the buttoned-up crowd I usually associate with. But I was captivated by something about him. "So you believe it's a good idea to paint history a new color?" With a light-hearted smile, he inquired. The other man rolled his eyes. He was a stocky man with a shaved head. "Hey, it keeps the structure intact, doesn't it?" "Yeah," he said, "but it erases the character, the wear and the cracks. The story is told by that." Attracted to their easy banter, I started to creep closer. Sarah suddenly materialized next to me, her eyes gleaming mischievously. "This is Mark, Amelia," she said, urging me on. "I'm Amelia, the spreadsheet whiz I mentioned to you, Mark." As he took me in, Mark's smile got bigger. "A spreadsheet wizard. It sounds amazing." With a flush creeping up my cheeks, I answered, "It pays the bills. But if the topic isn't amortization schedules, I can hold my own in a discussion." Sarah laughed as I gave her a wink. "I accept the challenge," Mark said, his voice warm and inviting. "So, Amelia, the spreadsheet wizard, what do you think about preserving history?" We ended up talking for hours about everything and nothing. He was an architect, passionate about breathing new life into old buildings, while I shared stories of my crazy hours at the firm and the thrill of closing a big deal. The conversation flowed effortlessly, and before we knew it, we found ourselves standing by the railing overlooking the glittering city skyline. The cold air sent goosebumps prickling down my arms. "This is fun," I admitted, surprised by the slight tremor in my voice. "Yeah," he agreed, his gaze fixed on the city below. "I wouldn't mind doing this again sometime." "Me neither," I blurted out, unable to overthink it. Our first official date was a dinner with Mark's parents, Martha and Arthur, at a fancy restaurant. The conversation flowed easily, at first revolving around wedding plans, the beautiful old library venue I had booked, and the expensive organic caterer I was stressing over. Then things took a strange turn mid-bite of her lobster bisque, pronounced with a peculiar accent. Martha suddenly fixed me with a steely gaze. "So, Amelia?" she said, dabbing her lips with a napkin. "Mark tells me you work in finance?" "Indeed. I'm a financial analyst at a large firm downtown," I replied, unsure where this was heading. "Analysts. Sounds important." Arthur chimed in, his booming voice filling the table. Mark, who had been mostly quiet, cleared his throat. "Dad, come on, that's not what we're talking about. Just making conversation, son," Arthur said, waving his hand dismissively before turning back to me. "So, Amelia, you mentioned a big-name firm." I told him the name. A global player in the financial world. A satisfied smile spread across Martha's face. "Excellent," she declared. "And you say you do well for yourself? Investments, stocks, that kind of thing?" "Yes, I manage a portfolio," I replied, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. This felt more like an interrogation than a casual dinner with my future in-laws. "A portfolio?" Martha leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "How much are we talking about here, dear?" My jaw dropped. This was outrageous. No one asked questions like that. I glanced at Mark, hoping he'd intervene, but he just fiddled with the breadbasket, avoiding my gaze. "That's really personal information, Mrs. Miller," I said, forcing a smile. "Oh, come on, honey," Martha huffed. "We're practically family now. Isn't that right, Mark?" Mark mumbled something non-committal. His cheeks flushed. I decided to take control of the situation. "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Money isn't everything. Mark and I love each other, and that's what matters most." "Love is great, sweetheart," Arthur chimed in again. "But let's face it, love doesn't pay the bills." I took a deep breath. This dinner was turning into a disaster. "Maybe we should stick to talking about the wedding," I suggested, desperately trying to redirect the conversation. The following morning, I called my grandma right after I got off the phone with her. As I recounted the awkward dinner with Mark's parents, a wave of doubt washed over me. Her words about greedy and selfish people echoed in my mind, but I dismissed them. Grandma could be a bit old-fashioned at times. Sure, Martha and Arthur were blunt, but they genuinely seemed happy for us. Maybe they just struggled to express their emotions. Fast forward a few months, and the wedding planning was in full swing. Every detail from the venue to the flowers felt like pulling teeth whenever money came up. Mark would give a sheepish shrug and say, "Work's been a bit tight lately." His parents, bless their hearts, kept offering suggestions. Cheaper venues outside the city. A family friend who could cater at a discount, which really meant they'd barter for vegetables from their neighbor's garden. In the end, I found myself footing most of the bill. Mark, ever the charmer, would say things like, "You're amazing, honey," handling everything like a champ. But his lack of financial contribution started to grate on me. Finally, the big day arrived. It was beautiful. The weather cooperated, the food was delicious, and most importantly, Mark and I said I do. The only sour note was Grandma. After the ceremony, she pulled me aside. Her wrinkled face etched with concern. "Amelia, honey," she said, her voice low. "Be careful with those in-laws of yours. They don't have your best interests at heart." I rolled my eyes. "Here we go again, Grandma." "They're just excited. They love Mark. They love me. Everything's fine." The honeymoon phase barely lasted a week before the first major incident occurred. It was a lazy Sunday morning, and Mark and I were still luxuriating in bed when a loud thump from downstairs shattered the peaceful silence. We exchanged confused glances, and Mark mumbled but that thump was quickly followed by a cacophony of rustling paper and muted exclamations. 3 Nairobis. We ran downstairs, only to see a scene that looked right out of a horror movie. Well, a horror movie loaded with weird wrapping paper and nasty present bags. Martha and Arthur were splayed on the living room floor, surrounded by our wedding presents like vultures pecking over a cadaver. They were looking inside boxes, raining and rule over certain objects while dismissively tossing others aside. "What in the world is going on here?" and demanded disbelief lacing my voice. Martha made unwrapping, glanced up and flashed a brilliant smile. "Amelia, sweetheart, Simply appreciating your gorgeous wedding gifts." "Admiring?" I sputtered. "It seems more like you're ransacking the house." Arthur held up a crystal vase, peering at it. "Relax, honey. Just straightening things out. Can't have all this junk laying about, can we flutter?" "Incredulous," I cried. These presents were thoughtfully selected by our family and friends before I could express my anger. "Maybe they should just leave the presents unopened," Mark said. Although he spoke softly, the message was obvious. I added my voice. R.A. wasn't entirely unaware. Martha laughed. "Honey, don't be foolish. Refusing to open gifts is impolite. In addition," she said, her eyes shining, "maybe there's something really unique in here, particularly for them." As I watched with increasing annoyance as they went through her wedding presents, I thought sourly, putting aside whatever piqued their interest. A picture frame made of silver, a sophisticated cheese board with a set of wine glasses with engravings. I had reached a breaking point. "Our wedding presents are these," I spoke firmly. "Not for you to take." Martha's tone was brimming with phony sweetness as she said, "Look, honey. We recently came across some items that would look beautiful in our new home. The one redecorating, you know. They were remodeling with our wedding gifts." The rage rose up inside me, ready to boil over. "What about the present you gave us?" I questioned, my voice strained. Martha halted, her fingers hanging over a box covered in a lovely flowered paper. She rummaged among the pile and eventually brought out a little irregularly shaped parcel with a flourish. She gave it to me. With every layer of tissue paper I removed, my heart sank as I gently unwrapped it. There was a cheap glass figurine with bright plastic flowers on it, the type you get at a bargain store. I felt sick to my stomach. They thought of this as a wedding present. Grandma could have been correct. It's possible that my marriage was a nightmare. The situation involving the wedding present was only the beginning. Martha. Sprees for shopping became commonplace. Her cheerful phone call asking me to go out with her was really code for me to be her unpaid personal shopper. As we perused stores, Martha would unavoidably come upon an item at the register that she simply had to get. She would grumble about forgetting her wallet and how handy it was to have different bags as she made this strange shuffle with her things and mine. I would have to pay for both of our items by the time the clerk worked everything out. Not much better was Arthur. His favorite times to visit were on the weekends. He shows in without warning, settles down on the couch, and then spends the whole day watching TV and eating any food I have available. He gave me a straight-faced look and remarked, "I wonder why you spend so much time at our place. Doesn't it save money on electricity and groceries?" How foolish the man was. Did he believe we were in charge of the charity? Ever the peacemaker, Mark simply rolled his eyes and mumbled that his father needed some company on his birthday. The last straw was dinner. To celebrate being another year older and perhaps wiser, I made the decision to treat myself to a wonderful evening out at a classy restaurant. I invited Martha and Arthur, of course. A huge error. The menu had a confusing mix of unknown substances and French names. Despite this, Martha and Arthur placed their orders for the priciest meals, confidently stating them despite their master's total ignorance. Martha complained that the escargot was too nasty and pushed her dish away halfway through the dinner. Meanwhile, Arthur spat saffron broth all over the table as he choked on a mouthful of boiling bass. The whole night was a catastrophe. My blood pressure had skyrocketed by the time I received the bill. We could have been nourished for a month with the money spent on the lunch. And you know who volunteered to help? Not at all. Not Mark. I coughed out a string while he sat there unaware. The waiter thanked me and grabbed my payment card. I was furious and upset when I got home and eventually went up to Mark's. "How can you allow your parents to treat you in such a way?" I insisted. "Come on," he murmured dismissively. "Babe, it's not really important. That's simply the way they are, such as entitled and self-centered." I fired back. "This isn't acceptable, Mark." With a groan, he combed through his hair. "You must choose your fights, even if I adore you. My folks are doing fine. They will remain unchanged." Perhaps he was correct. Maybe I had been gullible and thought I could somehow transform them into the in-laws I had always imagined. However, the truth was right in front of me. There was no changing the fact that Martha and Arthur were who they were. Although it was a turning point, the birthday dinner fiasco wasn't the end. Their approach to gift-giving became painfully obvious. On holidays, give us inexpensive sentimental things and expect lavish gifts in return. A Christmas-framed photo of a lighthouse. For Mother's Day, consider getting a high-end espresso machine. Any indication at the imbalanced worth of presents, per Martha's thinking, led to a lecture about family and not keeping score. My grandmother, may she rest in peace, would never ask for anything. I would always ask about a Christmas present. "Honey, I have everything I need," she would say dismissively. "Come on over, that's the only important thing." In the meanwhile, Martha and Arthur viewed Mike's gift-giving as a sport. They arrived with a proud gleam in their eyes, displaying their newest treasures, a set of mismatched oven mitts adorned with fading cartoon cats for Valentine's Day, and a cracked porcelain fruit bowl for Christmas. Every sacrifice was like a kick to the face. That year's Thanksgiving was the last insult. I had chosen to spend the evening alone with Mark. We might watch a movie and get some takeout. Naturally, however, Arthur and Martha had different ideas. Their faces painted with smug smiles, they stormed in carrying shopping bags. "Happy Thanksgiving, my love." Martha followed me after noticing a box that was brightly wrapped and wrapping it. I feel sick to my stomach. A garish scarf, similar to those seen at gas station gift shops, was inside. The fabric felt like sandpaper against my skin, and the flowers were plastic and fake. "Well, isn't it ideal?" Martha smiled. "It's a perfect match for your new coat." I made an effort to grin. The coat was a vintage item that was purchased at a second-hand shop, but there was a spectacular clash with the scarf. I muttered, trying to hide my disappointment. "Thanks, Martha." Arthur, meanwhile, was displaying a tiny box. He also announced a small gift for you, son, to help you relax after a demanding workday. When he excitedly opened the box and found a pack of cheap drugstore cigars that smelled like regret and dirty ashtrays, Mark's eyes brightened. With a sincere smile on his face, Mark said, "Thanks, Dad." That was it. The last straw. Here I was, looking at a birthday present that was offensive to my taste, and a husband who seemed more concerned with his wife's welfare and a pack of drugstore cigars. I felt a simmering anger that threatened to explode. However, I did something wholly unexpected rather than blowing up. I inhaled deeply, made myself smile, and expressed my gratitude for the beautiful presents. With my work performance, there was a ray of hope. I received a sizable bonus that practically begged for celebration, along with the coveted quarterly award. Venice has long been a popular travel destination because of its charming canals and extensive history. Knowingness sealed the deal by speaking Italian fluently. This trip would be an opportunity to get back in touch with Mark and temporarily break free from his parents' controlling influence. However, bad news, in particular, spreads quickly to eager ears. When Martha and Arthur heard of her trip, they swooped down like ravenous vultures. "Venezuela," Martha said, her eyes shining with unsettling greed. "Sounds good. I've always wanted to get a close-up look at those gondolas." Actually, in an attempt to be courteous, I interrupted. "It's just Mark and me on this trip. A brief romantic retreat." Arthur laughed. "Don't be self-centered, Amelia. We've never visited Venice, much less Europe. Consider the images." Images? This had nothing to do with gondola photo ops. It was about getting away from their oppressive presence. I apologize, but my voice was firm. It's a two-person trip. An epic meltdown resulted from my refusal to accept my pop. They accused me of attempting to distance myself from Mark's family and called me avaricious and selfish. The worst thing ever, Mark. For me, the peacekeeper didn't send up. Rather, he muttered that it wouldn't be too bad and that perhaps they could come alone. I realized then that this was more than just a trip. This concerned respect, boundaries, and whether our marriage could withstand his parents' persistent interference. I spoke in an icy tone as I glanced at Mark. "Not at all. They are not invited on this trip, which is ours." The ensuing battle was vicious. Accusations flew like daggers, and harsh words were exchanged. By the end, there was a thick silence between us. We withdrew to opposing sides of the flat. Our formerly contented home days became hazy as a Cold War developed, and the quiet in the apartment served as a continual reminder of the distance that had grown between Mark and me. I didn't give his folks a call. My stomach turned at the thought of their entitled whining. In his self-imposed exile, Mark stayed. All we could say to each other was a hushed good morning in the kitchen. I then woke up one random Saturday morning to find my apartment empty and a sick feeling in my stomach. It irritates me when my phone buzzes during the nightly notifications. Looking at it, my blood, rain, chilly, confirmations of airline tickets, to Venice, all 3 of them. Buy for my account. My throat was scratched by panic. No, it's not possible. But the nauseating reality set in as I read through the confirmations. With the boldness of a seasoned criminal, Mark had booked his own ticket to Venice as well as additional tickets for his beloved parents, using my reliable access to our bank account. Additionally, I used my hard-earned money to book hotel reservations. My suspicions were validated. He had used my money to book a trip for himself and his leech-like family behind my back, totally ignoring my feelings. Any affection I still had for him was smolderingly destroyed by the rage. The hotel reservations and return flights were canceled as my fingertips swept over the screen. Then I cut off Mark's access to my bank account with steely determination. Despite their enormous selfishness, it was a tiny gesture of disobedience. After a few hours, my phone rang. I let Mark's name go to voicemail even though it displayed on the screen. A second later, the notice came, his voice filled with anger and fear. "Where the devil are you, Amelia? The hotel is where we are expected to check in. With the tickets, what did you do?" I didn't listen and erased the message. Then both Martha and Mark sent a flurry of texts, containing veiled threats, accusations, and demands. I felt a chill of gloom go through me after reading Mark's last message. "We're done, Amelia, if you don't return the account to me and get us on that fucking plane." Think of this as your notice of divorce. Now that I had clarity, I began to plan on my own. My burden decreased with every step I took toward freedom once I got in touch with an attorney. Mark's notice of divorce may have been a present. He waltzed back in with his tail between his legs, but I didn't wait for him. It was cathartic to pack. Knickknacks went into boxes, clothes into luggage. However, the extravagant baubles and mismatched sets that Martha and Arthur gave are not touched. I arranged them on the floor of the living room, an homage to their self-centeredness. One last act of rebellion before I closed that chapter of my life. The smell of cinnamon pastries and old furnishings at Redeemer's house was like a cozy embrace. As I described the entire experience, tears came down my cheeks. Anger and anguish are leaking forth like a dam. I patiently listened. She had a melancholy grin, with a trace of, "I told you so," but largely with worry. She murmured quietly, "I told you, honey. You have to learn things the hard way sometimes." "I know," I responded, my voice settling with a renewed resolve. This may be a good thing. I now know what to avoid and what to look for. A few days later, the afternoon's tranquility was broken by a knock on the door. Before I could respond, Rima pushed me into the rear room and peered through the curtain while my heart lurched. I noticed Mark standing there, looking disoriented and hopeless. "Please, Amelia," he begged. He spoke in a desperate tone. "Let me clarify." With an inscrutable look, Rima cracked open the door. Acknowledging his sins and attempting to put his parents out of his mind, Mark went into a groveling apology. I let out the rage that had been building within of me. With icy rage in my eyes, I stormed into the corridor. "Himself?" I sneered. "You were going to take them on vacation with my money, Mark. This isn't about you realizing everything at once. This has to do with your comfort level, at ease since I purchased gifts for your parents and paid the bills." He protested by opening his mouth. He was interrupted by it. "This is over, Mark. Comfort overrides respect, and I don't want to spend my life with someone who allows his parents to dominate him and his spouse. I'm worthy of better." Mark's face crumbled, but I didn't feel sorry for him. With a finality that reverberated in the ensuing quiet, the door closed. Grandma could have been correct. This might not have been the end. It may have been the start of something new, a better one. An existence devoid of entitled in-laws. A life without selfishness or convenience, full of respect and perhaps Sunday love. Story 4. After 8 years of marriage, I can still clearly recall that soggy Tuesday morning when everything fell apart. The locks had been changed, and my possessions and trash bags were on the front porch when I returned home after my night job at the neighborhood cafe. When I phoned my husband David, my hands shook, and I heard his icy voice. "It's finished. Sarah, I've moved on. Don't attempt to return." I stood there looking at the house I purchased and the house we bought together, the rain seeping through my waitress uniform. Although David's name appeared on all the documents, the down payment had really been covered by my cherished grandfather's legacy. When he claimed that it was simpler that way with his credit score, I had total faith in him. How foolish I have been. Once more, my phone buzzed. Our shared bank account sent out an SMS alert. Equilibrium. $0. Savings of 8 years are gone. My other account likewise ran out of money. I trusted him, so he'd had access to everything. Because I had faith in our union, I had no idea at the time that this was only the beginning. I packed as much as I could into my ancient Honda Civic since I had nowhere else to go. I drove to my mother-in-law Patricia's house with the only thing remaining in my name. Perhaps there had been an error. She might be able to explain what was going on to me. I ought to have been more aware. Wearing her trademark pearl necklace and frowning disapprovingly, Patricia opened the door. I could see Amanda, David's sister, grinning behind her as Patricia looked down her nose at my drenched, disheveled look. "You're come to plead for money, I guess, now that David has finally realized his mistake. Please, Patricia." My voice broke. "I have no idea what's going on. It's all gone. The savings are in the home." She chuckled. "Oh, honey." But her laughter lacked warmth. "Did you truly believe that a waitress and someone like David would be together forever? Now that he's finally advancing in life, he wants a better partner." Her high-end timepiece was adjusted. He did, however, survive longer than I had anticipated. Years ago, the majority of gold diggers would have revealed their genuine selves. A gold digger? Stunned, I muttered. "Our residence is paid for by me. I helped him pay for his MBA. "Using the funds of your grandfather?" Amanda added her voice. "What? For years, you've been controlling David. He has now reimbursed you. You'll probably have to find another wealthy elderly man to cheat on." 8 years' worth of memories were being rewritten in my head as I stood there, tears and rain mingling. At other family gatherings, they abruptly made fun of my jaw. The way they disregarded my role in David's accomplishments. How I had never been accepted by them. The impoverished young woman from the opposite side of town who dared to wed into their cherished family. "He's where?" My voice is now more powerful. "Where is David?" Patricia smiled cruelly as she replied. "On his honeymoon. With Jessica. Do you recall her? He recently hired a new executive assistant. For months they have been dating. You know, she comes from a wonderful family. She will be far more adept than you in advancing David's career." The world whirled around me. At the office Christmas party, Jessica, the woman you recruited 6 months ago who insisted on working late, frequently gave me a charming grin. Al was reportedly having an affair with my husband before. Looking between Patricia and Amanda, I understood that you all knew he was unfaithful. "We knew, of course." Amanda gave an eye roll. "We assisted him in making all of his plans. David's business has Jessica's father on its board. His career will flourish as a result of this marriage. As opposed to you, who has been preventing him from succeeding with your shameful little waitress position." As she reached for her door, Patricia spoke. "Before I contact the cops, I'd like you to go. Additionally, there's no use in attempting to challenge this in court. Everything is taken care of by our family lawyer. Remember that you signed a prenup? Nothing will be given to you." Once more, I was left alone in the rain when the door slammed in my face. I slept in my car in a Walmart parking lot that night, too stunned and heartbroken to shed a tear. When I attempted to check into a budget motel the following day, I discovered that my credit cards had been canceled. Next was my phone. It had apparently been part of David's plan. I only had my car, the clothes in my trash bags, and $237 in cash after 48 hours. I was able to secure a bed at the women's shelter in the area. I didn't miss the irony. I spent years volunteering here, never dreaming that I would eventually become a resident. I was given a private room, which is typically used for emergency situations, by Grace, the shelter director, who remembered me from my volunteer days. She brought me a cup of tea and said softly, "You're in shock, Sarah. You underestimate your strength, though. And we'll help you fight back when you're ready. I didn't think she was real. How could I then defend myself? David had taken everything, planned it all perfectly. He had his family's money, their lawyers, their connections. I was just a waitress with a worthless degree in social work, trying to make ends meet while supporting my husband's dreams. But Grace was right about one thing. I was in shock. So much so that I almost missed the most important detail of all, and detail that would change everything. It happened 3 days into my stay at the shelter. I was helping in the shelter's kitchen. I couldn't afford to pay for my stay, but I could at least cook. When I heard excited whispers from the front office, "The CEO of Montgomery Industries is here." "What's Alexander Montgomery doing?" "Our shelter. I heard he's doing a series of surprise visits to local charities." I froze, nearly dropping the part I was holding. Montgomery Industries, David's company, the place he'd worked his way up to, middle management, always complaining that he deserved more recognition, faster promotions. I'd never met anyone from his work. He'd always said I wouldn't fit in at corporate events, but I knew about Alexander Montgomery. Everyone in town did. The brilliant young CEO who'd taken over his father's company 5 years ago and transformed it into a tech giant. The businessman who put our small city on the map. The man who, if the gossip was true, had no patience for dishonesty or corruption in his company. Before I could decide whether to hide in the kitchen, Grace came rushing in. "Sarah, Mr. Montgomery is asking to speak with all our residents. He's making a large donation and wants to hear their stories firsthand. Would you be comfortable joining the group?" I looked down at my shelter, provided clothes, touched my unwashed hair. "I don't have Grace. I'm not really presentable." "Nonsense," she said firmly. "You're one of us now, and your story deserves to be heard." So that's how I found myself sitting in a circle with 15 other shelter residents, facing Alexander Montgomery himself. He wasn't what I expected, younger than I'd imagined, maybe in his mid-30s, wearing a simple button-down shirt and slacks. No fancy suit, no arrogant attitude. He listened intently to each woman's story, asking thoughtful questions, taking notes. Then it was my turn. "I'm Sarah." Silently, I said, "I'm here because my husband emptied our accounts and changed the locks while I was at work." He works for your company, actually." Alexander Montgomery's head snapped up his pen, freezing mid-note. "What did you say?" I couldn't stop now. The whole story poured out. The 8 years of marriage supporting David through his MBA, buying our house with my inheritance, discovering his affair with his executive assistant, his family's cruel dismissal. "He's David Chen," I finished, my voice barely a whisper in middle management. "He just married Jessica Williams. Her father is on your board." The room was dead silent. Alexander Montgomery's face had gone completely still, his eyes intense. "David Chen," he repeated slowly. "The one who's been pushing for a senior director position, who's been claiming his wife is fully supportive of his career moves." I laughed bitterly. Supportive? I didn't even know he was divorcing me until I found my belongings in garbage bags. "Grace?" Alexander said, suddenly standing up. "May I use your office for a moment? Mrs. Chen and I need to have a private conversation." "It's Miss Miller now," I corrected quietly. "I'm going back to my maiden name." He nodded, a strange expression crossing his face. "Miss Miller, then please come with me." As I followed him to Grace's office, I had no idea that this conversation would change everything. That within 24 hours, David's perfectly planned new life would begin to crumble. And it would all start with 5 simple words from Alexander Montgomery. "I've been looking for you." I followed Alexander Montgomery into Grace's small office, my heart pounding. He closed the door and turned to face me, his expression intense. "5 years ago," he said, "did you write a business proposal for a corporate-sponsored chain of community resource centers?" My mouth fell open. "How did you—" "It crossed my desk when I first became CEO," he continued. "Brilliant concept combining job training, childcare, and social services in economically disadvantaged areas. The financial projections were sound, the community impact analysis thorough, but when I tried to contact the author, Sarah Miller, she vanished. The email bounced back. The phone number was disconnected. I sank into a chair, memories flooding back. That was right after I married David. He said the proposal was too amateur, that it would embarrass the network. He made me take it down from all the submission portals, said I should focus on supporting his career instead. Alexander's jaw tightened. Do you know what happened to that proposal, Miss Miller? Nothing. Because your husband buried it. He accessed the company submission system using his credentials and withdrew it without your knowledge. We found the digital trail during a system audit last year. We couldn't locate you. He what? My voice shook. However, why? Because David Chen has been taking credit for other people's work for years. We suspected, but couldn't prove it. He's very careful, very manipulative. Alexander perched on the edge of Grace's desk. The proposal's withdrawal caught our attention because it was exceptional. I'd been hunting for its creator ever since. Tears flooded my eyes. All those nights I'd worked on that proposal, dreaming of making a difference. Our David was evidently undermining me. There's more, Alexander murmured gently. 2 months ago, David presented a modified version of your idea before the board, claimed it was his own work, part of his ambition for the senior director post. Jessica's father has been promoting him for the position. A bitter chuckle escaped me. So that's why he chose now to depart. He eventually discovered a way to leverage my labor for his gain. Miss Miller, Sarah Alexander leaned forward. I'd like to offer you a job as director of our new Community Impact Division. Your initial concept will be the basis, but you'll have complete resources to extend it. Starting pay is $250,000, with perks and stock options. I glanced at him, convinced I'd misheard. But I'm simply a waitress. No, he said firmly. You're a smart strategist who's been methodically undercut by an abusive partner. Today is the last day of that. He pulled out his phone. I want to call our legal team if you don't mind. David Chen stole and misrepresented your work, committing business fraud. That is grounds for termination right away. My mind whirled. However, is his new wife's father a board member? Fraud is fraud. And once he finds out the truth about his new son-in-law, I have a feeling Mr. Williams won't be as encouraging. After that, everything moved swiftly. Within an hour, Alexander's legal team showed up. They collected evidence by morning after taking my statement. The truth of David's deception came to light. His company accounts were blocked, and he was publicly sacked. The incident appalled Jessica's father, who promptly dissolved their marriage. I wasn't present when it took place. However, after learning that I was now a director of the firm, Amanda told me in a last-ditch effort to patch things up. When David and Jessica returned early from their honeymoon, security was waiting, and their keycards were revoked. You dare! David had allegedly yelled at Alexander in the foyer. Do you know who my new father-in-law is? Was Alexander corrected quietly. Mr. Williams offers his best wishes and advises you to find work far, far away from our business, and the marriage has been dissolved. At that moment, David noticed me standing next to Alexander in a high-end suit, a present from the stylist for the firm. His face turned pale. Sarah, what? Why are you here? Regaining what is rightfully mine. Calmly, I said, you stole the proposition. It's being put into practice. The profession you attempted to ruin is thriving. The woman you threw away, she is the right hand of your new employer. Amanda and Patricia attempted damage management. Naturally. All of a sudden, they started phoning all the time and left heartfelt voicemails about dedication to family. However, I now had a new family, the amazing Montgomery Industries team, who appreciate my efforts and accept my thoughts. Our first community resource center was piloted at the women's shelter where I would stay. Grace became the program director. We would open 10 more centers around the state in a year. When I last heard from David, he was employed 3 states away as a junior analyst for a tiny company. Patricia loves to gripe about her new daughter-in-law's poor marriage, and Jessica married a rich developer. As for me, well, there's a different story. It began with late hours spent working with Alexander on center concepts, strategy meetings that evolved into dinner conversations, and meetings that continued well after the agenda was finished. One evening, as we watched the sunset from his office, Alexander murmured, "And not him. I'll never make an effort to block your brightness." I said, "I know, because I was aware." I discovered that someone who wants to see you is not the same as someone who wants to own you. Saw, my world came apart 2 years after that wet day. I was standing in the Montgomery Industries headquarters' opulent ballroom. To commemorate the inauguration of our 15th Resource Center, hundreds of staff members and community members came together. Now for the microphone announcement. Please welcome Mrs. Sarah Montgomery, our newest board member and Community Impact Director. A light caught on my wedding band as I stepped up to the stage. Nothing ostentatious. Alexander is aware of my preference for tasteful minimalism. In a throng, I spotted my elderly mother-in-law. Through a professional connection, Patricia had arranged an invitation, perhaps in an attempt to get back together now that I was married. However, I had changed since she brushed me off in the rain. I smiled as I met her eyes and started talking. I prepared a proposal 5 years ago on the value of community support and how everyone should have the opportunity to recover, develop, and shine. We're not only launching another facility today, we are bringing that vision to life. I stopped and put my palm on my somewhat protuberant abdomen. Our very first kid. For a few more weeks, it will remain our secret. The worst betrayals in life can sometimes bring us to our true calling. Losing everything occasionally means creating space for all of your dreams, and occasionally, the greatest. There is no such thing as revenge. Living your truth is what it is, so fearlessly that those who attempted to destroy you are reduced to a footnote in your triumph. Applause erupted in the room, and Alexander squeezed my hand, and I gave David a quiet, "Thank you," at that same moment. I am free because of his harshness. I was here because of his treachery. The husband I lost didn't. My brightness. However, I discovered a mate who made me shine. I lost a status-driven phony family. However, I created a genuine one founded on respect and love. Above all, I discovered that I was the woman who would always be there, ready to come out strong and capable. Unstoppable. We could afford more when Alexander and I drove home to our small home that evening. However, he said, "I adore this once cozy garden. Do you have any regrets?" I caressed my expanding abdomen. 4 of our growing centers are enthusiastic about working together to shape our future. Only one. I grinned. Years ago, I ought to have looked at the corporate submission portal. The sound of his laughter was pleasant in the silent automobile. Everything took place at just the right moment. And what do you know? He was correct. The greatest benefits in life might occasionally be camouflaged as its most terrible situations. You have to lose everything sometimes to locate something you were unaware you were seeking. And sometimes, Tuesday mornings can occasionally be rainy, when everything in your universe collapses, turns into the initial part of your most amazing journey.